us back. You're in Charleston now, but where are you from?
Well, I'm actually originally from Iowa. So I grew up in a little small town in Iowa and
Okay.
went off to school to the University of Iowa for a year, not knowing what I wanted to do. And
Okay.
then I moved back to Des Moines, Iowa, which is the capital, and went to Grandview College to nursing school. So I started nursing school in Iowa. And then I met my husband. He was from Nashville, Tennessee. He was traveling and we got married. So I moved to Nashville and so continued my nursing education at Belmont University, which is in Nashville, and graduated from there. And
Okay.
then my first job was at Baptist Hospital and I did oncology nursing. So I was, learning how to give chemo and all those sorts of things. And for a part-time job, I decided to work with our local hospice agency. And
Okay.
so I started doing hospice care, just PRN. And so, on the weekends, if one of their patients passed away, I might go out and do the final care for them and meet with their family. And I had to call the coroner. And it
Okay.
was sort of, I was like, well, why do I have to call the coroner? I'm the one standing here. I'm the one with the patient. I started kind of questioning what it was we were doing and why we had to do that and learned a little bit, just enough to be dangerous, honestly. And
Right.
then it just so happened that I learned of a forensic nursing conference that was happening in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was one of the first that had occurred in the country. And I went to it, didn't know anybody, just went to sort of see what they were talking about. And it was a little bit of legal nurse consulting and sort
Hmm.
of the beginnings of sexual assault nurse examiners, and that sort of piqued my interest. And then my family, we relocated to Charleston, South Carolina, and I started working for the Medical University of South Carolina. I went on to a bone marrow transplant unit, which is kind of like what I'd come off of with oncology. And I met a paramedic and his family, and I mentioned an interest in forensics, and he said, "Well, the coroner is a nurse." And I was like, really? And so her name was Susan Tuning. And so I reached out to her and sort of said, I'm really interested in what you do, and got to know her a little bit. And she gave me a piece of advice. She said, you might want to consider going to the ICU or the ER to get some experience so you can interact really with forensic patients. And I followed directions really well. And I I immediately called the emergency room at a local hospital, our county hospital, and so it was a local county ER, and asked if they had openings. And I left my job on the bone marrow transplant unit and immediately moved to emergency room. And unbeknownst to me at the time, that's where really gunshot wounds were coming and the sexual assault victims were coming, and we didn't have a sexual assault team at that time. And I got interested in how do we care for them, and started taking some classes, and started networking with other nurses around the country who were sort of beginning this practice as well, and end up coordinating the sexual assault team for the medical university in their beginning stages. And then in 1998, Susan asked me to come and join the coroner's office. She and I had worked together on a couple of projects. And so I joined the coroner's office, and at that point, there was 3 nurses in the office. So Susan Tuning was the coroner, Ray Wooten was the chief deputy coroner, and then I joined the office. So we were very unique in that we had 3 nurses who were investigating deaths within our county. And so I sort of stumbled upon it, but also had a unique interest in this specialty.
Wow. So let's back up, maybe for the audience, or maybe just for me, and I'm the idiot here, but surely other people have these questions. A coroner. So what does a coroner do?
Sure.
Nurse or not?
Yeah. So, the responsibility of a coroner is to investigate deaths that occur within their jurisdiction. And we have the
Okay.
responsibility of determining cause and manner of death, how and why someone died. Now, there's different systems in every state. So, not every state has coroners. Some states are a coroner system, some states are medical examiner systems, some are a combination of the two. But in the state that I'm in, which is South Carolina, it's a coroner state. So, there's one coroner who's elected in each county. We serve 4-year terms. And that position is elected because we speak for the person who died, and because it's elected, there isn't anyone who can tell the coroner to stop investigating. So that's the reason why it's elected. So I don't work for the police chief. I don't work for the sheriff. I don't work for the mayor. I work for the people.
So
And
you're the top coroner now,
yes, so
and it's an
I'm
elected position.
Yeah, so I am the elected coroner in Charleston, South Carolina. So Susan
Okay.
Tuning, who was the coroner I started under, she retired, and then Ray Wooten became coroner. She was appointed by the governor to fill her term, and then she ran for office for a couple of terms, and then she retired 2 years ago. So I ran for office, and so now I'm the elected coroner in Charleston County.
That is so cool. I think so I'm from Texas originally,
Mm.
and my stepmother, she was a hospice nurse as well. And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you may not know about Texas, but I feel like the justice of the peace had to come out. Does that sound familiar in some places? I mean,
Yes. So
okay.
Texas is sort of an outlier as far as systems, and it is a justice of the peace system. So they don't
Okay.
have coroners. They do have medical examiners in some of the big cities like Houston and Dallas. They have a medical examiner's office, but they are definitely the outlier across the country. Uh, in my jurisdiction, if there is an individual, well, so first of all, I tell you what we investigate. So we're responsible for investigating the death of anyone who occurs outside of the hospital setting. So, whether that's in their home, on the roadway, a hotel, whatever it might be. Also, any death that occurs inside a hospital facility that's occurred within less than 24 hours. So, most everyone who's in the emergency room would be reportable to the coroner's office. And then we're also responsible for anything where they died inside the hospital. They've been there more than 24 hours, but it's not from natural causes. So, for example, someone is in a car accident. They're taken to a local hospital and they are being treated for a week and then they succumb to their injuries. That would be reported to the coroner's office. And so we have legal jurisdiction to investigate those deaths on behalf of the decedent.
Wow. Okay. So, since it's an elected position, do you have to have medical knowledge? Do you have to be a nurse, or is this as a bonus as you're trying to get votes? Hey, I'm a nurse. I've been a forensic nurse for this long. I know I can do this job on behalf of the patient who has deceased.
So in my state, both. Most of the states where the coroner is elected, there aren't any requirements to run. When
Okay.
Susan Tuning started, and even when Coroner Ray Wooten became coroner, there were no requirements to run for the office of coroner. I think that's one of the reasons they both won, is that the public recognized that it was important to have somebody with medical knowledge. When I started, there were no requirements as far as medical knowledge. But what we learned over the years as we trained new investigators, new nurses, others who are in our office. Not all of the investigators in my office are nurses, but we did learn that it was much easier to train someone who had medical knowledge, the law, and the legal aspects of our system, as opposed to taking someone with legal knowledge, like a police officer, and teaching them the medical side. It was
I
much easier to teach them the legal side because, as we all know, nurses come with a vast array of knowledge that's very helpful when investigating death. It's part of the holistic system, from birth to death. We understand pathophysiology, anatomy, microbiology, we understand pharmacology. When we see a prescription bottle, we have an understanding of what it's for and being used for and what that person's been treated for. When you look at medications and you count them and you recognize the counts off, well, what does that mean? Or you see multiple pharmacies and multiple doctors on prescriptions. Being able to review medical records and understand the process of what has occurred with this individual if they were being treated for something. So that medical knowledge is just paramount to what we do. But so has that changed the requirements? And it has in South Carolina. So a number of years ago, we actually petitioned the state legislature to have requirements. And there is a listing now of options, and being a nurse is one of them.
Okay. So you're the elected coroner, but you have other nurses that work for you. Are they elected or do they have to apply for a job within your office?
So I'm the elected official, and all of the investigators or deputy coroners are appointed. So I appoint them to their
Oh,
positions,
okay.
and they work really under the legal authority of the coroner. So I have a couple of nurses that work in my office with me, and then I have non-nurses as well. I think it's good to have a good mix of that. But
Okay.
I do have other nurses who are working in our office now. The two newest are both pediatric emergency room nurses where they came out of. And that's very, very helpful as we're investigating the deaths of children.
I could not. I am not a peds nurse. I don't I and it's not because I don't love kids. I just get too emotional about it. And it's the same reason I couldn't do the sexual assault for pediatrics. No.
Yeah.
No. Those are special people. And actually my best friend from high school, she worked her degree in college was, I think, was it human development,
Mm,
and then she went back to our hometown. Paris, Texas is where we're from, and she worked for the Children's Advocacy Center, and she was a forensic interviewer where she had, these children that had been assaulted, sexually assaulted. She had to interview them, and she worked with the detectives. But honestly, I don't know if she worked with nurses.
mm,
I don't know if she worked with forensic nurses, if they did kits or what, because this was a nonprofit and they did the interviews. Oops. Um, outside of that.
yeah.
So interesting.
It's and a couple other of the responsibilities that coroners have is we are the responsible entity to identify who the individual is. So, if we've got someone and they don't have ID on them and so forth, how do we identify them? We're also the ones who make sure that their next of kin is notified. So, if we have a traffic accident that occurred on the highway at 3 in the morning, once we identify who that individual is, it's one of us is probably knocking on someone's door. And so that also brings in a whole the psychology aspect and mental health
Mhm.
aspect of what we do. Again, this is probably the epitome of holistic care
Right.
in so many ways. And then not only do we want to investigate the death, determine the right cause and manner of death, care for their family, and provide information, but we want to then take the information and use it for prevention if we can. So if there is
Right.
a way that we can take what we learned from investigating, for example, the opioid epidemic we're in. We try to do a lot of education on the importance of Narcan for those individuals and families where substance use disorder is a struggle that they have. And so being able to provide information and prevention in order to prevent these some deaths from happening, we want to do that as well.
Wow. Okay. So how many investigators do you have, including yourself, in your office?
So my office is composed of, I think there's 25 of us now. We
Oh,
have 12 investigators, but we also manage a full-time forensic autopsy facility. So I have 4 autopsy techs that are in this facility as well, and a couple of forensic pathologists. So we're a pretty big organization. But we cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We cover Charleston County, which is a growing populace. I think our population's about 470,000 now, but we're one of the top tourist destinations in the world. So we, at any given time, can have thousands of tourists in town. We have cruise ships and container ships and
wow.
places where most people don't think that a death might occur. And unfortunately, we board cruise ships fairly often. So when you think of sort of the vastness of what all we may investigate, is pretty wide. And then we're
That is,
responsible for preparing and responding to mass fatality events. So Charleston County, I have the real unfortunate distinction of having worked 2 mass fatalities. One, we had a major incident with a Sofa Superstore where we lost 9 firemen a number of years ago. And then
oh,
the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church was here in Charleston County. And
okay.
so we handled all of those deaths, investigating them and working with their families. So we also have to do mass fatality planning and response if that's necessary.
Wow. So how does it work? Is it kind of like an on-call? You have an investigator or two on call 24 hours a day and everyone takes shifts sort of thing? Or how does it work?
Yeah, we do. So when I started, which was 20 some years ago, we were,
Yesterday.
back in the day, as we say,
Right?
back then we would take call for 48 hours at a time. Over the weekends, we would cover 72 hours. And as we got busier and busier and Charleston County grew and grew, we just couldn't do that. It just wasn't safe to be on call that much. And so eventually it changed to 24 hours and then it changed to 12 hours. And now we are on a shift rotation where we have 3 on a day. They're each covering really a 10-hour shift that crosses over each other. But again, somebody is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we always have a supervisor backing up.
Okay. I was going to say, do you ever double up? I mean, I guess there's
Yeah.
busier times, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Do you ever
Yeah.
double up?
Unfortunately, there are. There are some trends that we've noticed over the years. We've noticed that when it's raining, we have less fatalities. It's sort of
What?
seen across the country. Yeah, everyone stays inside. They aren't out and about. You just amazing, sort of some of the things that we see trends in. But we do have more than one person always available at any given time.
I wonder if it fewer fatalities when it's colder as well? Because I feel like crime decreases in the winter months.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see less crime during that time. Probably our homicides are down, but
Okay.
unfortunately, depression goes up, and so we can see an increase in suicides during that time. Sometimes increases in overdoses, depending on again if we have a real bad cold spell, we could have hypothermia if someone doesn't have heat or our homeless population. So the temperatures can impact. You know, positively and negatively on sort of
Right.
what the numbers are as far as what we see as trends.
Wow. Okay, so you're the coroner for Charleston County. So for every county in South Carolina, there's a coroner that has been elected.
That's correct. There's one elected coroner in every county.
And is it per the state that it has to be a nurse, or was that Charleston County that only said it has to be a nurse?
So in South Carolina, we actually have four nurses who are coroners. So there's four of us, maybe five. Now that I just said that, at least four are no. There's five nurses who are coroners, and we're probably unusual across the country. I think there's a number of nurses here and there that have run for office for coroner, but we've got probably the biggest number of them in this state. I would chalk that up to Susan Tuning, who was probably the first nurse to really run and take office. And then
Okay.
we've been very good about sort of providing education and very involved in our state, and that sort of encouraged other nurses to run. And I think the community understands the value of nurses. We are a trusted
Yeah.
profession. And so,
Yes.
when they see on the ballot that there is a nurse and a non nurse, it sort of makes sense that from the public
Right.
perspective that they go, well, the nurse has one medical knowledge. They know how to
Mhm.
work with families. They're not afraid to talk about topics that are maybe uncomfortable, whether that's drug
Right.
usage or pregnancies or whatever that may be. Uh, and then they also just trust the profession. They trust that we are understand grief and can work with families and help them through that.
That's amazing. That's right. Nurses. I used to be, when I think back, very modest. Didn't want. Now I've got no problem asking you anything I need to know. I will. And no, I think all nurses are like that. They'll just ask you,
Yeah,
no qualm, and that's important because this is, sticky.
yeah.
I imagine, especially with what you're doing. It's
Sure. And how do you gracefully ask questions? Um,
right.
and I think nurses can be very good at investigating the deaths of children. And although that's a hard topic to talk about, we are familiar with growth and development. We are able to
Yeah.
ask questions about pregnancy and delivery and prenatal care, sort of getting understanding of the whole family dynamics as it relates to this child and what happened to this child, and we can ask it from sort of that medical perspective as opposed to the law enforcement police officer perspective. So even here in Charleston County, when we have a death of a child, law enforcement for the most part wants the coroner's office to do the first round of interviews. We interview
Mm,
differently. Doesn't mean we interview better. It's
right.
different, and our approach is a little bit different. And we get different kinds of information that's really important to us to answer questions as to what happened to this little child. And so that's a skill that nurses actually bring to the table and that we train other non nurses who are in our office.
Yes. Well, I mean, nurses are used to it is your job to ask questions pertaining to medical things. And I mean, you ask and ask and ask. What you were in the ER once. So the triage nurse, all they do is ask and
Yeah.
ask and ask and ask and ask. So that makes
And,
sense that
and
it'd be comfortable for them.
and then I think the other thing is that when you've got a nursing background and you've trained on growth and development, it makes sense when somebody's not giving you the right answer. So
Right.
if it's reported that the 2 month old sat up, well, we know from a growth and development standpoint that that didn't happen. So you're
Right.
also able to have information about uh, the human body and the medical aspects that are and aren't possible. And does the story that we're getting from whoever we're interviewing make sense? And if it doesn't, to ask questions to try to either understand, make sure we're not, miscommunicating, or is there deception there, hoping that we don't figure something out. And so there's some places where a nurse interviewing is much stronger than law enforcement interviewing because we pick up on some of that.
I mean, if you think about it, it makes so much sense. But that's not what we see, with I would say probably largely movies and TV shows. You
Mm.
see medical examiners. There might be a mention of a coroner. No one really knows what he or she does.
Yep.
And then there's a detective. And then
Right.
there's like CSI, there's a lab. And, there might be a nurse in the hospital because that's what we all think. But no, there's a nurse coroner and they're running the show that was elected. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. We get the question all the time. What is it you do? And there's this perception that, they call us out when someone has died and we go, "Yep, they died." Well, no, they don't call us until they know the person has died. And then we
Right.
have the responsibility when when we respond, to identify who that individual is, locate their family, make sure that we
Mm.
investigate the scene, and all aspects around it. Does it make sense? How did this event occur? Whether it's an accident or a suicide or a homicide, and then how do
Right.
we document all of that? And this is where photography comes in. So we do our own photography, our own interviews, reviewing any documents that we can get a hold of. If I need cell phone records, we request and subpoena cell phone records. And so we're speaking for the decedent. That's who we work for. And as an extension, their family. But if the
Mhm.
family is the guilty party, then obviously we don't
Mhm.
speak for them. We're speaking for the decedent and making sure that we have an understanding of their cause and manner of death.
So because I know you have you have a lot of investigators under you. Many of them are nurses, and you said you prefer, or it can work out better when they're nurses because they have the medical knowledge and you can teach the legal. So
Mhm.
when you hire someone, do you have like a training program you send them through, or is it just on the job? How does that work?
A little bit of both. So we have an in-house training program that we have everyone go through, and that's where you learn the laws of the state and what our jurisdiction is. How do we sign death certificates and what the laws around that, those kinds of things, and how to begin investigating. But then we also do a lot of outside training with other agencies, or we'll go to different conferences and get them training. There is a national certification. The American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators has a national certification. So everyone who's qualified in our office is certified or has become a fellow, which is a board certified investigator. And then there's professional organizations. So the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners is one that we do a lot of training with. I happen to be the president of that organization, so I put a
Told
plug
you on
in.
Bobbi Jo.
Put a plug in. And then, the International Association of Forensic Nurses I've been involved with for many, many years. Was
Yeah.
on their board of directors for a couple of years. And so, very interested in the professionalism and the promotion of nurses in a lot of settings. But this is a setting that I think we have specific qualities that really enhance this profession.
I completely agree. So that's why I was telling, Jana, I was like, do you think she'd do it? I think this is, the podcast, I think this is so amazing. Um, so do you know of any other states that operate that way with a coroner? Or is it most of them and then you have a couple of outliers?
So it's about 50-50. So
Okay.
about half of the states are coroner states where they have elected coroners. There's different requirements in each state. So some states, most of them have elected coroner, there aren't requirements to run. So Georgia, Mississippi, there's a number of them. I think Ohio, there's a bunch of states. There are some that have requirements. So where you have to be a physician, for example. Doesn't say you have to be a physician under any certain type of practice, but you may have to be a physician. There are medical examiner systems. Yeah, so it's just based on the state. So each state has a different requirements within their state constitution as to who can run for those offices or what the requirements are. Most of them with corner states, there aren't any requirements.
So here's a dumb question. If it's a coroner state, that means there's not a medical examiner that we hear all the time, or are they interchangeable? So if a state has a medical examiner, it probably doesn't have a coroner sort of thing?
Yes. So in my state, we the individuals who do autopsies are forensic pathologists. So they don't have the title of medical examiner. So really, medical
Okay.
examiner is a title, and those medical examiners are often forensic pathologists. So they're physicians who went
Okay.
through a pathology rotation, who then did a fellowship in forensic pathology, and they're boarded in forensic pathology. So, do we
Okay.
have forensic pathologists who complete our autopsies? We do. Their titles
Okay.
are just not medical examiner. In some states, the medical examiner is the head of the death investigation authority of whatever jurisdiction is investigating, and they may happen to also be a forensic pathologist. So, medical examiner is just a title term.
Okay. So if a nurse in any of these 50 states is like, this is so cool. How do I learn more about it? What would you suggest for that nurse? Should she go to find out what exists in her state, what she needs to do, that sort of thing?
So, a couple of things. One, I would check out IAFN, which is the International Association of Forensic Nurses. We
Mhm.
actually wrote death investigation guidelines for nurses a few years ago, and those are on their website. So
Okay.
to start some information, I would also recommend IACME, which is the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners. It's a great way to sort of learn the profession and about systems. And then
Mhm.
the other thing is to go to their website and search their state statutes to figure out whether they are a medical examiner system or a coroner system. If they're a
Okay.
coroner system, they might want to consider running for office. If they are in a jurisdiction where the coroner is elected, maybe they should figure out who is the coroner currently and how are the people in that community being served and consider running for office. If are not, then maybe try to network with that office and learn. Maybe try to get a position with those. There's also ways you can volunteer sometimes with offices around the country who are looking for someone to help with their child fatality team or opioid fatality review teams, or there's a number of sort of avenues. But figuring out who is sort of the legal authority in your jurisdiction is going to be step one, because that'll dictate sort of how you try to enter and join in that practice and learn what they're doing.
Okay. So for you, when you're looking to bring on an investigator and you have a nurse apply, what looks good to you on paper?
Mm.
Or maybe in person too. What are you looking for in a nurse?
Well, I'm looking for someone who's teachable.
Okay.
And that's number one. And it may surprise individuals, that I'm not looking for a certain set of nursing skills.
Mm,
Nurses who've been in an ER or pediatric ER come with sort of a unique perspective because they're used to law enforcement coming in the ER. They're used to
right.
working with paramedics. They're used to seeing detectives coming and going. And so and that's where all forensic cases come. So a gunshot wound that's coming into the healthcare facility is first coming through the ER, or the motor
Right.
vehicle victim, or the overdose, the psychiatric patient. It's all coming through the ER. And so it's really a great place to sort of get some rounded experience, if you will.
Mhm.
But having just an openness to learning, being detail oriented, and having an understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. This is a specialty that is not for everyone, just like OB is not for everyone. um,
Right.
this is one of those areas where once you do it, you're either gonna, it's either your love or it's really not for you.
Yeah.
One thing I've seen with a few nurses over the years is they really wanted to get involved because they wanted to investigate homicides. They thought that would be really cool to investigate homicides.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, those aren't the interesting ones.
Hmm.
Those are pretty
Why not?
simple. Uh,
Oh,
they have a gunshot wound. Well, that's not interesting from an investigative standpoint. What's
okay.
interesting are the ones that we're not quite sure what happened. And we need to
Oh,
interview individuals and we need to review their medical records. And we may have to pull their pharmacy records. And we're really looking at sort of a whole picture of what happened to this individual. Those are the interesting ones. And so you've got to be curious and wonder what happened because, again, we're speaking for that person. So
right.
I'm sort of looking for sort of a round of skills, ability to communicate, and just understanding of the process is probably what I would say initially.
Well, I think that's awesome because what you were saying before is, this type of nursing is not for everyone. That's what's so great about it. I think some nurses love families, they love the bedside, they love, XYZ. Some, they still like medical things, but maybe they don't want to interact with the family as much. And people are like, oh, that makes you a terrible person. No, it doesn't. And P.S., you don't have to leave the nursing profession. There's other things that you can do to use your nursing degree that fills who you are. I have a friend, she, spent many years at the bedside in the ICU, but now she's doing organ donation,
Mm.
and that's
Yeah.
another kind of like that. You're not dealing really with patients that,
Yeah,
that are
that's a
alive
group.
and going to make them.
Yeah, that's a
Sorry,
group
go ahead.
we work with all the time is organ procurement agencies and making
Yes.
determination on whether someone can or cannot be a donor based on our investigation. And so to be able to have a communication with someone who also has a medical terminology and some medical knowledge makes that conversation go smoother.
Right.
Having to talk to a physician and being able to speak the same language and, that I'm understanding what the physician is saying. Is a good thing, Um,
Right.
Oftentimes folks will ask us, how how can you do this work as a coroner and a nurse coroner? And I think I just have to say that, as we are investigating the deaths of individuals, we know that we didn't cause that to happen. But what we
Right.
can do is use the skills that we have to not make it worse, to get
Mhm.
them the answers that they deserve, those family members, and speak for those individuals because
Right.
we impact a lot of things if we don't get it right. And
Right.
so some will say, well, what do you mean you impact things if from a death investigation we don't get it right? Well, we can impact whether a family gets their life insurance or not. If I don't investigate well and I don't have it correct on the death certificate that it's an accident or it's a suicide or it's a homicide, they may or may not get their life insurance. They may not get victims assistance funds. If we don't
Mhm.
get it right, somebody might be charged for a crime of which they're not guilty, or they might not be charged for something of which they were guilty. And if we don't get it right, then the death certificates are wrong. And well, what does that impact from a holistic aspect? Well, if the death certificate's not right, and then our statistics are not right, then the money that our federal government spends on prevention efforts and healthcare is not right because we didn't have the right information. So, as a death investigator, as a nurse, as a coroner, we impact a lot of things. And so that's why we take it very, very seriously. It's our serious profession, a lot of responsibility, and one that I'm just honored to serve and serve my community.
I think that's so cool. Well, we kind of had the same sentiment as sexual assault nurses. People are like, "Oh gosh, how could you be participate in that? You're going
Mhm.
to make the patient feel worse, or you're going to upset them." And which, I mean, it is an upsetting thing for them, but you can talk to them, you can empower them in this way. No, this is you saying yes to this, taking control, and then possibly impacting what happens after that. And so, in the same way,
Yeah.
the impact is sort of down the road, and
Yeah.
it can be really big for them.
Yes.
And you're speaking on behalf of the person that died. If we do this right, this can impact all of these things. I think that's so cool, and nurses
Absolutely.
do that.
Well, it's what nurses do every day. Yeah.
Right,
I'm doing what
right.
nurses do every day. I just have it
Yes,
with a different population.
yes, and I think it's so cool. 'Cause, most nurses don't know you can even do that. They don't even know that that's a possibility, and that might interest them, so I really wanted to highlight it. So
Yeah. Well,
thank you so
I can't
much.
wait to hear from some who this sparks their interest, and either they show up at a conference and come up and say hello, or they reach out and sort of want some more information. We are a community that's glad to bring on individuals who want to do great work in this arena.
So if someone wanted to reach out to you or to your office, how would they find you?
So the best way is email. They can just
Okay.
email me. It's O'Neal at charlestoncounty.org. It's Boneal,
Okay.
charlestoncounty.org. They can find us on the web, Charleston County Coroner's Office, and we have a Facebook page. They can follow us if they'd like to. And then also through IACME. So, as I mentioned, I'm the current president of the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners, and they can reach me via that as well.
Okay, and I'll have all of this in the show notes, and if you're okay with that.
Yeah,
At least the website's in the show notes, and, I think that's so cool. So if you hear from someone, you'll have to let me know.
I will. Lots of times the nurses uh, will reach out. They catch my name somewhere, and we can provide some basic guidance. And one, check on your state and how to figure out what your state is, and but the best way
Yeah.
is through the state statutes. If you see it's an elected position, consider running.
I I would be so nervous. Were you nervous the first time that you ran for office?
Well, of course. Um, but again, I think what's important for nurses, especially wanting to run for coroner, is that the public, again, trust nurses. And
Yeah,
so to get that word out that you are a nurse, you have a medical background, and that you're pursuing the right information on how to investigate deaths, the public respects that. And so I
yeah.
think, especially if you're in a system where maybe the death investigation system is not doing very well, and there are many across the country, this may be
Mm,
a way for nurses to enter, really be able to make some positive changes and impact their community greatly.
great. I think it's cool. I can't wait to tell everyone.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah.
When you've been doing it for a long time, you sort of forget that it's unusual. But we're glad to assist and sort of help those who are trying to enter this profession.
Well, can you I mean, you think back when you went to nursing school, was this ever in your thought
No,
process?
well,
Likely
no.
not.
I mean, as I mentioned, I started doing hospice, and then I would have to call the coroner, and I'm like, why? Who am I calling? Why am I calling the coroner? Like,
Right.
you're not even here. But now I understand it. I understand because Tennessee is a coroner system as well. So I
Okay.
understand I was doing and why. And no one could really explain it to me. But clearly I had an interest at that point because I started sort of asking, and then it just sort of snowballed from there.
Well, I think it's great because you don't know what you don't know until you start asking questions. You're like, wait a second, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then it just sort of snowballs into this, because look at you now. You're an elected official in Charleston County.
I know, who would have
You're
thought?
crazy.
Who would have thought? And then there's probably maybe a couple nurses that are listening, and they're not interested in being coroner, but maybe there's another office they want to run for.
Yeah.
Nurses do not have to remain in regular nursing. There's so many options, and to have some voices that are speaking for nurses about mental health, about public health, there is a great need for more nurses to be in public service. And so I would encourage, even if they're not interested in being the coroner, there may be in another elected office they are interested in.
I agree. Um, I don't. Well, I don't think I ever. Well, I don't know when I would have told you this. I was in the Marines
Oh,
back in the day. We've talked about back in the day. It was a
thank
long
you
time
for your
ago.
service.
I was well. Thank you. I was stationed in Beaufort,
Oh, lovely.
North Carolina. So for those who don't know, Beaufort's about an hour south of Charleston.
Harris
It's
Island.
about it's about an hour hour south of Charleston, then an hour north of Savannah. So we would go up to Charleston, sometimes south to Savannah. So I know a little bit of the swamp
That's
that
right.
you
And
live in.
Beaufort County is beautiful and has grown greatly. You might not even recognize it.